Welcome to In Front of Ira.
We're Sabrina.
And Torsten.
Two historians.
And friends.
And lovers.
Of romantic comedies.
And this is the podcast in which we answer the age-old question.
Will they? Or won't they?
Is it, or isn't it, a romantic comedy?
And we don't have anything that we ever attempted to say after that. This is the whole intro. It's never been different.
No.
These are not the droids you're looking for.
Exactly. We're talking about Rye Lane.
Yeah,
from
we're talking about a very recent one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess we should introduce people to Rye Lane because not many people have seen it. Presumably, even though it's reasonably easy to stream over here right now because it's part of Disney Plus, which is because it's on Hulu in the United States. So you do, I think, have a decent enough chance to get access to this. It's a British independent film. Also, got funded by various things you can get funding from in the UK, the BFI, the National Lottery Fund. So, yeah, you can tell this is low budget, even though if you watch it, it does a lot of this small budget that it has, I think.
It has great cinematography.
Yeah.
We need to talk about the
amazing cinematography. And it's the directorial debut of Rain Ellen Miller, and the book is by Nathan Bryan and Tom Mellier. All of these people have mostly worked in British TV before, I think, but not on the scale. So this is, I think, basically the first big project. So
yeah, it basically was one of those movies that were produced in the kind of boom that followed the lockdowns in the COVID pandemic. Yeah. So it kind of made use of all that. You can imagine the production kind of probably being quite marred by that still. You don't notice that in the movie at all. Rye Lane is set like another movie that we watched, mostly in North London, mostly in Peckham.
South London.
Sorry, quite, yeah. I don't know why I went north. I think...
South London, mate.
Yeah, no, clearly. South
Peckham,
London.
Yeah, my new niche taste is low budget rom-coms that are set in Peckham.
Yeah, if you want to make a rom-com for Sabrina, that's the thing that it needs. It's
apparently a thing, yeah. It's Super Bob and Rye Lane. And actually, so they're both obviously as a shot on location and actually not very far from each other because they're both in Peckham. You can find for Rye Lane, since it's so recent, they put out a little thing where you can actually there's a little map of all the locations you can download.
Yeah, because it's a lot of location shooting on this one.
Yeah, and they went a bit, so most of South London, so it's also in the south, work at the end they were near the Tate Modern is and so on and so forth, so that's a more recognizable
kind of classic,
St. Paul's
for weddings type stuff.
Yeah,
at that one.
But it's it's geographically actually very far from both Peckham and Brixton is sort of that thing, but so they use different locations than Super Bob there, but they're still very close together. And it stars David Jonsson as Dom and Vivian Oparah as Yas. And they have a meet cute in a bathroom.
Yeah, in a unisex
gallery bathroom.
Which made me think of Ally McBeal. I'm not sure if that's on purpose. It's also, we have to say, because I think the rom-com genre has been so overwhelmingly kind of white and whitewashed.
Yeah.
These are black people mostly in this rom-com. There's a few other roles, but it is very clearly from that perspective, and that also gives it kind of a different perspective than your typical Richard Curtis rom-com, which we've talked about people have criticized the fact that black people basically don't happen in Richard Curtis rom-coms.
Yeah.
And still at the same time, this really, really fits into that genre of the British rom-com that also takes up tropes and takes up very clearly after this and references these very directly as well. So yeah, they have a meet cute in that unisex bathroom. He's crying in the bathroom. That's how we start. We start with overhead shots of people doing very different things in bathrooms, which is like you go and like, what is happening here? What is happening? And then we kind of center on Dom crying in the bathroom, and then Yaz walks in. Not on him.
Watching videos of his ex that he just broke up with 3 months ago, which is sort of the setup of like he's very heartbroken. Turns out his ex cheated on him with his best friend, and it's sort of this awkward meet cute of like he's trying to cry, but then someone walks in and he's confused as to why there's a woman like from the voice like in this bathroom. It's like, well, it's a unisex bathroom, and then they like because they're at this gallery and it's like this vernissage of like a shared
it's like
friend.
A gallery opening, yeah.
It's a gallery opening thing of like a shared friend of theirs.
Great like artist character who has took these pictures of basically open mouths, which features the wonderful line, which I will never in my life forget. The mouth is the Stonehenge of the face. I have no idea what that means.
I also like that it's like treading this line of like, I guess, like, I mean, that specific Black community. Also, I think there's a Caribbean and Jamaican descent, like in this one scene that we go to, but not for everyone. It's a very mixed Black community as well, and it also straddles the line between like nobody's ever working class on rom-coms, but there clearly must be a background of like immigration and probably, but like as we are with the characters, it's still trying to show there's like, you know, upward mobility happening. You know, there's the artist community, very pretentious artist. Also, she has a very pretentious ex who's an artist as well, who is really asshole.
Funny. Like he plays that so well.
And Dom is an accountant. Which is sort of the
not your typical hero character.
And I mean, this is also where the thing comes in of like he's, I think, trying to do sort of always the low key right thing, you know. He also has a stable home, which, you know, in terms of Black representation is always a thing to point out, because too often you get like Black families, particularly in US productions, where everyone's broken up and, you know, divorced parents and deadbeat dad kind of thing. No, he's very doting parents, and he's currently staying with them, and his mom always makes a little lunch in a lunchbox and
makes eggs for him in the morning.
Eggs and soldiers, and like, because after the breakup, he's now, because they were together for 6 years and they were living together, so he moved back in with his parents, and that's where he's at with his life. He's playing video games all day and sort of, I guess, dragged himself out to go through this gallery thing. And she's trying to become a costume designer and trying to make the jump. And on this day, as we learn, she's supposed to have a job interview, which she then skips on because she's too afraid to try again after being turned down a bunch of times. And then, you know, they start talking and walking together, which feels very like before sunrise. And this is how we get this whole day, basically, at first of them. This is the majority of the movie, of them just going from location to location, getting involved in some shenanigans, because like she tells him about her breakup with her pretentious artist ex. There's a thing where she wants to go back into his place to get back a record, a Tribe Called Quest record. He still has. They try to get the key. This is how they end up at the parents' house of her ex, and like, you know, it's just sort of
it's a journey. Like there is a Before Sunrise is in this. It also reminded me a little bit of One Day, not because that's comedy, although I guess parts of it are, and it has kind of like this whole outlook of we're just meandering, we're wandering, and we're talking, and it feels in that sense kind of like a real, like, getting to know somebody, kind of condensing the time, because we talk a lot about the importance of the passage of time for rom-coms, so you can kind of believe that people fall in love with each other, and they manage to do this in essentially this one day where most of the movie is set, and it just is it's a packed day. So much happens on this day as they kind of just meander through. Rye Lane Market is where they're centered around, which is where it gets its name from.
Yeah, and this getting to know it also feels real for this, like, moment in both their lives where they're kind of struggling, where they don't know what's next. Like he's, it's this breakup upended his whole life. So he's with his parents. She's, trying to make this jump in her career, and it's not really and it feels very real for this sort of, I don't know how old they actually are. I feel like it's like mid-late 20s then. I mean, he's already been together with his ex for 6 years, probably that
mid-late
moment
20s.
in your late 20s when you're first getting out of your first long relationship, and you're just trying to figure shit out, and it feels very real to that as well, sort of this meandering. And one of the references, one of my favorite things is that they get what is it? I think burritos or
at a place called Love
Actually, and they're being served by none other than Colin Firth.
Right, and they call him Colin, so I wonder if in the script it basically just said Colin Firth serves them burritos, and they're like, well, we'll just try to get Colin Firth, and then they actually got Colin Firth, which is again references. It is lovingly referencing a whole bunch of rom-coms, including one that we've just done, which is My Best Friend's Wedding, because there's also a reference in Rye Lane about the boats, the tourist boats, and that is in My Best Friend's Wedding as well. So it really kind of has multiple references, and it obviously knows what genre it's in. It's kind of a heightened magical realist movie as well, so it makes sense that it would do that.
And that it is reflected in this amazing cinematography. I can't help but put on, there's so much discussion, at least in my social media bubble, about how shit a lot of the big, Hollywood blockbusters have started to look like, particularly Marvel films, because of the type of CGI they use and the coloring they don't use. And now with Wicked, even though I've been told, I haven't seen Wicked yet because I'm just about to open here, but the trailers were heavily criticized for, especially Wicked, the Land of Oz just not being colorful at all. Apparently the coloring of the film, the
people
finished
are so
film,
mad,
is much better than what we've seen of the trailers. So I haven't heard complaints from final reviews, but it was a big talking point. So it's also possible that it while they still had the chance, redid that since the trailers. But it's weird. And this movie that again has a BFI funding, lottery funding, is a debut low budget film, has this amazing coloring. It's so colorful, and they also do a lot with the wide lenses. And
so I actually read an interview with the cinematographer Olin Collardi, and there is a lot of this movie feels like it's photographed through a fisheye. It's not quite, but it is also, it's distorted. You can often see that the center of the frame is closer than the rest of it. And it's basically, he said 3/4 of this movie are shot with a 24 millimeter wide anamorphic lens on a full frame camera. So you get really, really wide shots, and they don't try to correct for any imperfections in the lens. The edges of the lens are often blurry in ways that are just clearly not something that a lot of kind of classic Hollywood cinematography would tolerate. It's smearing, but it's very much a style that works so well for this movie.
Yeah, and then the set design and the costume design, and it's just it always has color. There's these bright reds and yellows and greens and everything. And obviously I think that's also a clear reflection on also the Caribbean and Jamaican culture, which I think is most when they go to this Jamaican barbecue at this house of her ex's mom, or moms, I think.
Moms, yeah.
Yeah. And we also see close-ups of the food, and I think, but it carries over to everything else. They also find all these places in the Rye Lane Market and wherever else they go that have these bright, colorful spots. And again, they're close to, he's in a green jacket for most of the movie. She's in this yellow jacket, and
the colors are the light colors, especially in the night scenes when they're in the market or when they're in a karaoke bar, really just emphasize this. There's a very kind of distinctive scene at some point when she's just lit completely by blue light. It's very, it pays attention to that. You talked about set design. I loved the set design, because there are fantasy sequences in this movie. Basically, whenever they talk about things that aren't happening right now, when they'll tell each other the memories they have, or like fake memories that they tell each other, and some of these are staged as if it was a stage play, like really beautifully. And the set design pays attention to this. There is at one point a kind of like the fake breakup scene between her and her annoying ex, which is made to look like essentially like a West End stage. And some of the set design items of that are later actually found when they go and break into his apartment. Like, they really paid attention to have a connection between this fantasy and then the reality that we enter later. Yeah. It's really well done.
Yeah. And and even the memory sequence is also fun because you like see them like enter this memory and like observe this memory in a weird way, which also like gives you the memory when he talks about his breakup and finding out his ex was cheating on him with his best friend because she accidentally FaceTimed him and then, or like video called him, and he took a screenshot, which gives you one of the best lines in the movie, because even though it was low res, I knew that dick. And then later we get the line, he of low res dick.
Yeah. And it's really funny because like when he says that it was the dick of my best friend, and we're like, you're just like, wait, how do you, like, is this and then you just see them next to each other at like urinals peeing, and like you can see like the pee, which is obviously like kind of special effected in, and they're just kind of like probably just got really drunk and just like peeing together with like, I think university gowns on, something like that.
Oh yeah, I think probably school, like it's mentioned at some point, and it still is made from primary school. Yeah. And this is probably when they're older, like older teenagers. Yeah. But it's British school uniforms, so
it's just such a quick visual. Oh yeah, now it makes sense.
And at the end of the credits, there's a blooper for the scene, because I mean they have physics. It's a practical effect. It's just like that's what you do. It's like a water effect. And it's like, but yeah, it's fun, and yeah, it has a fun soundtrack as well. Like obviously, like they talk about music a lot, and that the Tribe Called Quest record is like super central, because it's also again this like one of those tropes from rom-coms of like you have to have a shared taste, and music is quite often something that comes up in these things. And her ex being like all above, like it's being very sort of like, you know, how hip hop perpetuates bad black stereotypes, blah, and so on. And but then there's the funny thing where he like tries to connect with these people at the barbecue, and it's like his great music taste, and then he put his phone on shuffle, his music on shuffle. It's so funny because it's also stereotypically like white music, right? And it's Daniel Bedingfield, because obviously like he's going through a breakup, he's listening to super cheesy breakup music, he's listening to Daniel Bedingfield's If You're Not the One, which is like a millennial classic, and Bette Midler's The Rose.
I love the way that this character is portrayed as so heartbroken in the beginning, when he's in the bathroom and basically tells her to go away because he's trying to have a private moment, and she basically looks around and like, it's not that private, because they're in like a public bathroom. It's pretty funny. He also like, he is portrayed like this is a thing that you immediately see that kind of unites them, because he is shown with his headphones on. Like most of the movies, he has his headphones around his neck, and later you kind of like understand how music is really important to the story, and so this is part of the whole characterization and decoration, costuming.
Like she at some point pretends to be his girlfriend. It's like they have this classic structure of like, again, this was for Sunrise, it's like, oh, now would be a reasonable moment for us to like part ways. And they sort of basically do, because he has a meeting with his ex, who's now officially dating his like best friend, and he's trying to be very adult about it. And then she comes in and sort of rescues him by pretending to be his new girlfriend. And you know, and it makes up the story of how they met at this hip hop karaoke night and like brought the house down together, and later on they end up going to the hip hop karaoke night and then bring the house down together.
That was another
Salt
thing.
And Pepper song.
Yeah. Which is another thing that I remembered my best friend's wedding, right? Because the bad karaoke is a part of that as well at a very strategic point in time.
Yeah, and it's such a thing that always, like, karaoke is always such a fun moment for, like, Red, White, Royal Blue has a karaoke scene as well. So it's like, you kind of...
And it's like a growth moment in terms of, like, going up in front of a crowd and not taking yourself so seriously and all of that. And it's used to that effect as well.
And this is also the thing of, like, opposites attract, of, like, trying to coax each other. Like, she's clearly managing to coax him out of his shell and, like, make him do some crazy shit, like essentially breaking and entering into her ex's apartment, which he actually then, ends up liking because it's just something new. Whereas he probably gives her some more grounding to then actually pursue this career she clearly has and she's afraid of, and, like, sort of finding the middle ground between these two very well-adjusted accountant and more out there creative person who maybe not has her shit together.
Which is nice because you don't have, it's not one-sided, right? It's very much, you understand why they are good for each other, even though they're very different. Because she's very out there, but in a kind of superficial way, because, like, her fears about her career and that she's not good enough and that she can't hear another no in terms of her career prospects, that matters really for her character and his kind of coming out of the shell. His career is being an accountant. Like, he's going to probably be a more better accountant as he accountants his way up the accountant. I don't know how accountants work, but, like, he doesn't have, like, a huge job interview or anything that's going to change his life. So what is going to change his life fundamentally is her being in it and dragging him to do things, whereas, as you said, like, the grounding that he provides for her is very much what then also allows her to pursue her dreams. That's the other thing, right? It's not just that she's the one who is out there and trying all the new things and he is not. They actually kind of are fitting, like, pieces where each kind of, like, does something very well that the other doesn't do very well, and they bring each other to do these things.
Yeah, and also, obviously, I mean, like, again, they meet because he's, like, so upset by this breakup, he's crying, and it immediately sets up a type of masculinity, right? That he's the vulnerable guy, and that contrasts him a lot with, like, these other dudes we meet later. Particularly also his best friend, who is, like, sort of airhead, and,
I wrote this down because in the scene where they're sitting down, which is such a humiliating scene, right? Your best friend who is now dating your ex-girlfriend because they cheated basically both on you, like, in some way, and are trying to be adult about this, and kind of actually the scene is there so they're feeling better about having screwed him over, right? And he kind of takes it, and then she comes in and counters this and really calls out the best friend as well for being a bad person and calling him a jobless human bin fire, which is probably the most British insult ever. And it's just there's such a righteous anger behind that he could never muster, but she can do it on his behalf. That's really, again, we've said it, they're good for each other in ways that they might not even understand at first.
Yeah.
There is also, since we talked about this in our special episode, there is a scene at a chicken shop.
Yeah,
which
shop there.
Yeah, which I was expecting the Amelia de Moldenberg cameo that never came. So that's a ding on this movie. That should have obviously come. But kind of shows you how important that kind of culture is, and the fact that he tries to dress up a chicken shop, like he rents it out for just them and wants to have it be like a romantic thing, shows you how he's trying to be a little bit creative. He's trying to be a little bit out of his comfort zone, and his girlfriend just does not react to that at all. She doesn't like it at all.
Yeah. And I mean, again, I said this before, but I think it's so important to have this kind of, like, there's so much happening with that. Like, it's such a specific it's a specific community of South London and Peckham and Brixton and so on and so forth, but it's also, again, the variety of, like, what we see of, like, a kind of British life, but it's finding kind of the color in like a very British working class neighborhood, then bringing in all these different cultures of like, there's not one monolithic black culture in South London. It's all these different influences. And I mean, the cast reflects that too. The director reflects that, all of that. And it's like, but it's also, you know, it's very good at just portraying this, because nobody is just like, I think the thing with like a rom-com and the fact that it's so white, usually like, I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm just saying I think it's great to watch this film and like see the slice of life that is so important because it just exists, right? Without trying to make a larger point about any of it. It's just like unfortunately radical to like just exist in this world and let them be in this world and just be these like rom-com heroes that you know have
I always thought this is kind of like one of my Kitorum Kenzio kind of moments where if you make things extremely specific, they're going to be universally understood. If you try to make things general, you're expecting a generality that not everybody shares, right? And this is often the problem that I have with these typically very white Hallmark movies, kind of Hollywood rom-coms. They kind of posit a normalcy, which is usually white, upper middle or higher class people who have small problems that then in the end result in them coming together. And that's just not a universal experience. It's kind of they try to like, it feels like they're trying to generalize something out of that everybody can relate to. And it always ends up being less relatable than something that's not your community. Most people are not in a black working class community in South London. That's just, if you look at the world, not most people. But you can find in the specificity of a story, you can find the moments that relate to everyone. And I think that's a much better approach to storytelling than this. Then you know, like we criticize the Marvel approach, right?
Through a bad breakup, probably, and everyone or like can relate to not being afraid of like taking a step in their career and taking a leap, and can relate to being in their late 20s and sort of not knowing where to go, or like these kinds of things. And you know, and it's a really fun movie. And also it does get like the big rom-com thing at the end. It's very clear, still very basic rom-com structure of like after this before sunrise moment, like this most of the movie, we get the time jump and we get this like they have a fight, they, you know, stop talking, and then but before they get back in touch, it's actually her also like, okay, now I will tackle this career thing. She does get a proper job as a costume designer. She keeps talking about him, and everyone is basically like, hey, you talk about him a lot for someone you claim to not like. And, you know, and just having this kind of revelation of, and he also has this, like, he gets tired of sitting at his parents' house eating eggs and soldiers and like, you know, but it's also nice because she's the one with the grand gestures. Like, you also deserve to have a grand gesture, because he's like the sort of, he's always the reasonable accountant guy who gets cheated on, and she kind of,
And since you mentioned it, since the beginning of the movie, that kind of specific masculinity, which is not typically your rom-com hero, your typical dashing rom-com hero as a guy, especially if you go by like the kind of Hallmark ideal, which we shouldn't be using that as the ideal. But the fact that she recognizes that he is so much better than the best friend, who is much more that kind of man's man, not especially bright, but kind of like with the bravado, and that she really recognizes and says it out loud that like why are you with this guy? The guy you left is so much better. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, in that sense, he's almost a bit like Harry in When Harry Met Sally. He also spends a lot of the film being just very depressed about his breakup, right? But it's also, there is definitely another thing to it when you have a black man that's this way, right? And it's fun. And then she comes up with the boat thing because there's a moment between them, like, because her ex would always criticize everything, and but it was just like, scene.
I love
so
this.
he would like not want to wave at a boat passing. She's like, there's two types of people in the world: those who wave at the boats who are passing, and the people who just don't enjoy like fun.
Yeah,
you know?
I just love that scene when we see it's kind of one of those like little flashback scenes where her ex-boyfriend turns away from her and says like tourism funds sex trafficking, and that's his reason for not enjoying the tourism. It is. I love this because it's so kind of a like the heightening of, you know, a person that you know, right? If you live in an urban environment, you're gonna know like this one over intellectualizing person at least, who always brings down the everything by pointing out that there are horrible things in the world and they're probably connected to other things that you enjoy, but you know that's in the end is just life. And also
and there's a specific type of male leftist who's actually also just an asshole to women the whole time, and that's a very recognizable figure. In the end she's just on a boat and he's at this other gallery thing where they almost would have met, and then instead she's like waving at him, like calling him and then waving at him from the boat, and
which also kind of has that kind of like final we need to meet now kind of running through the airport, Harry running down the street, and kind of
it's just she didn't look up where the boat is actually going, so he has to backtrack to the boat landing on the South Bank.
Also very pragmatic, like that's the thing, which I hadn't really thought of that, but maybe that's like a sign that she's got her life more together. She's becoming more pragmatic in that sense. I don't know.
And I mean, there's the moment where it's clear that he's definitely has a more loose approach to life, no? Because it's like they talk about, we could go for a drink on that first day, or they could take this further and away. And he's like, yeah, but then I have to take like the last train back, and it's always such an hassle. And because the London Underground, for whatever fucking reason, only runs until about like midnight, one with I think 12:30.
Probably just to keep taxis in business, because like arrive in London after what is it, 11 at this point in time, and you see them lining up to get people to like their homes for stops on the Underground away. It's kind of ridiculous.
And then he's like, we're just gonna see, just gonna play it by ear. I don't need to worry about the last train. And
he's come out of his shell. It is such the thing that gets me about this movie. It is such a quiet movie, even in its kind of like ridiculous moments. It is such a deliberate movie. Everything feels incredibly deliberately done, which is something that you don't really feel that way necessarily for like the higher budget movies. Especially since, again, like coming back to that the Marvel example, everything feels like it's been sanded down, right? There's like a percentage of people that want to see this. There's a percentage of people that want to see this. There's an advertiser who needs there to be a scene with their product. We're going to figure out how to put this all together. And in the end, you get this weird mishmash, which just kind of like is constructed between the tent poles of Hollywood screenplay structure. And that's all that it really needs. Whereas here, it's a journey. It's not Ulysses, but there is that feeling of meandering, and the city and the neighborhood being a hugely important character in this, right? It's called Rye Lane, and it's called Rye Lane because it centers it in a place, and that's kind of the most important part about this movie.
Yeah, and I mean, she's also like the director said, and it's a love letter to South London, which is funny because John Draver, the director of Superboy, is like, this is a love letter to Peckham, and everyone wants to write a love letter to Peckham. Apparently, I have to go to Peckham the next time I'm in London.
I tried, and then it was too far away. Like it was on the
South Bank for whatever reason. For instance, the BFI is actually in the South Bank, so that also fits. But like, it's when I did my tour of all the romcom places, and I went from Notting Hill to
like all various different places that were in rom-coms.
Peckham is clearly up and coming.
Yeah.
I also really like want to do it. I mean, again, they made it very easy with the map for this one. You can still download. Like, I need to find a list of the Super Bob ones because it was a bit harder. But like, I would get a kick out of finding out how close they are together. But I actually saw, like, in one shot, there's a sign to the Peckham Public Library, which is one of the librarian and Super Bob works at. So, I just want a universe where they, like, you know, I want this to be in the universe and Super Bob still exists, and, like, you know, there's a whole thing that they should be doing. But,
just have him fly in the background.
Casually Super Bob exists in this. I mean, he's sort of retired by the end of the film, right? At first he wants to, but he doesn't. He still saves, well, he just doesn't live in Peckham anymore. So he could come back to
he's
Peckham
a superhero. He can fly really fast, so he can go to Peckham whenever he wants to.
Yeah. Exactly.
And clearly they like him there, so... Oh, man.
Anyway, yeah, I mean, I think also the deliberateness obviously comes with this little budget. You need to actually allocate every fucking pound you have for just the thing, right? You need to plan this out. Like, what are you going to do? You have a very limited schedule of how you're going to use these locations, and you need to get lucky with, like, things like the weather, and, you know, it is what it is. And,
which it's helped along by the fact that some of it is just location, which, I mean, if that works, obviously, that's great. And a bunch of the scenes that are set inside are, I think, in real houses or the real garden, or kind of, I think, really just constructed on a stage that gets to look like a stage, that's brilliant. That gets you exactly where you need to be, both from the visuals and the practicalities of it. Like the scene that I keep coming back to is the scene where she breaks up with her annoying boyfriend over hummus, basically, and A Tribe Called Quest, when he basically says that this is, like, she should turn it down, this shit, or so, and like that's just kind of like one step too far. Yeah,
that's blah blah, but it's and I mean, there's also where they're, like, on a playground, and they're, like, on the it's just all these locations. They're in restaurants as well. They're in the cinema, the Peckenplex, and these, like, in the market with all the closed kind of stalls that are very colorful doors and so on and so forth. Like, it's just, like, also again finding sort of the color and, like, what's special about these locations that might not appear special to you if you probably just walk through them, and it's sort of
just finding it in there.
Yeah.
What I really like about the structure of their relationship, let's just kind of, like, talk about that, is they get closer. They're obviously very quickly kind of deeply in each other's lives. The number exchange happens after the halfway point of the movie, right? They're still, like, for that long, for almost like 50 minutes, you don't exactly know where this is going. You don't exactly know what the movie is trying to tell you. And then 5 minutes after that, in movie runtime, it's after their karaoke, where she feels basically kind of elated and just almost accidentally kisses him, which then leads them to actually kiss and get kicked out of the karaoke club or club, and then
after making out in a bathroom.
After making up in a bathroom, which, like, takes us back to the beginning, right? And then exploring the nightly city together. I like this because it feels earned and it feels real. It also feels real that it's kind of accidental, but that it's not accidental in the sense that they didn't mean to do it. It's deliberate but accidental at the same time.
And they're on a moped together, which is very Roman holiday as well. Even though,
oh my god, I didn't even think of that. Yeah, obviously. Oh god, yes.
And at that point also, because at that point it turns into, like, night as well, also reminded me of, which, I mean, is something that also references another whole film, but, like, the Beard After Hours episode of Ted Lasso. This is also sort of where it gets zanier and they go from location to location, obviously way more heightened in its thing, but, like, there's certain texts, you know, like films and that we know that have this kind of thing of, like, we're just going from location to location and this is how the story advances. locations as well. So it's just, again, making use of the space and telling the story through the locations and the spaces you're in. And on this limited budget of like, where can we even go and what can we even use and how can we even use this to, and again, using maybe the same locations over and over again without making it feel stale, like having this apartment of him, using it in a flashback in a different way than when they go back to using the karaoke night in a like heightened sense, using the bathrooms again, that kind of thing, where you have two different gallery moments. Also the fact that like at the end, the vernissage is photos of butts. Which almost also feels like, because it already references Love Actually, there's this gallery or no Love Actually with the weird, sexy Christmas pictures with the like Santa had some nipples and also butts and whatever.
Which is the like, scene with Heike Makash that got cut that made it much more explicit about what she wanted. Yeah. It is so deeply steeped in the genre, and it is so deeply steeped in its location, and I think that's very true. Like the importance of the time and the location, the way that they move through the space and kind of circle back. And I bet if you kind of looked at this closely and you knew where it was shot and what locations got reused, that also kind of lines up with certain story beats. That there is again, and the word that I keep coming back to in this movie is deliberate. Like everything feels very deliberate.
Intentional.
If you weren't deliberate makers of this movie, you could have fooled us. Like it feels very deliberate, all of it.
Yeah. No, and again, you have to be, because and that makes for better movies, and I think that's part of the lesson here too. Like, I don't know why we get so little like low budget or mid budget films greenlit, because they would be much cheaper to make, and they often bring better results, because you don't need to waste billions of dollars in actors' salaries of like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And even the mid-budget films with like bigger names at the time already, like Julia Roberts or Tom Hanks, at least were a bit more reasonable in like what they were paying these actors, and clearly still made use of the other money they had very deliberately on locations and so on and so forth. And you were still using locations, which is the other big thing that went away, where it's now, if you can CGI it, we're going to CGI it. And this movie doesn't have any fucking budget for CGI, not even that, even though CGI has gotten cheaper, which is part of the problem. But like, this is like, no, we just like actually need to think about our cinematography, and we need to think about what we're going to make of Peckham. So I don't know.
Yeah, anyway. There's really, it's really weird, because you make something like For Weddings and a Funeral is obviously the breakout movie for Hugh Grant and Richard Curtis both, which is made on a cheap budget and blows up huge, right? And you cannot set yourself up even for that kind of success if you keep making huge movies that need to make their money back, which I guess like we're on a different track of criticism regarding how movies are made. But the thing that I actually really thought about when I watched this movie is it's also not a movie that could have been made maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago. And the advance of technology actually helps this along as well, because they don't have a huge budget, but they can afford maybe like one or two, like to rent one or two like really fancy cameras with a couple of lenses, and with somebody who knows what they're doing with the lighting and the color grading, and it looks amazing. And that's really a thing that, even if you look at something like what we just did, My Best Friend's Wedding, it looks great. It looks perfectly done. It looks perfectly done in that 90s Hollywood, we know how these things are supposed to be kind of style, and it's not experimental. You can be experimental these days and make it look perfect because the technology is there. And I really wish that people would realize that, right? And not just go like, oh, we can afford these cameras now, and we're just gonna make the Hallmark movie in 8K, but otherwise it's the same. No, you can actually experiment a little bit. You can try new things, and the weird anamorphic fisheye view of this is not something that I think I would have thought of when. If I had been like tasked to do this movie, if I was somebody who had done other romantic comedies, but it really works for this story.
Yeah, and it's it's again, like, I mean, and since it's also that connection, but like, again, with Super Bob, they barely had any money and they tried to make a superhero film out of it. And they managed to, because they placed importance on the thing that actually matters when we might want to watch these movies. At least I personally don't watch even these big Marvel and action films for these then 20-minute, 30-minute long battles.
I don't care, honestly.
I don't
I would
care.
fast forward if I could in cinema.
I'm here for like the human aspect of it, and it's, you know, it turns out you don't need it. You might need one big set piece at some point, and you can make it look great.
The reason that the Marvel thing resonated to me, it's directly referenced in the movie. When they go into the karaoke club, and there's this one person who's, I don't exactly know what their role is. But who basically, he tries to do the right thing all the time, and then gets told, "Oh, this ain't a Marvel movie, right? You don't have to be the good guy," and they kind of like directly know that this is not the story that they're telling, and even put it in the dialogue.
So, and I mean, so this actually had, let's talk a bit about reviews and taglines, I think, to wrap this up, but like this has a 98 on Rotten Tomatoes, like the critics, and 85 for audience reviewers.
And 7.2 on IMDb, which much higher than.
And I mean, I get it with the audience because, like, usually, I mean, this obviously is like Sundance, so it's like film festival stuff. So like people who go out to see at a film festival have certain expectations of like, this is a more experimental film and they know what they're like watching. They're watching an indie, so they will probably rate it very high because it's just a very good indie. And then maybe not everyone who just goes in, oh, I want to watch a cute rom-com, now it's on Hulu or like Disney Plus over here, might like it because it's still different, right? It still has an indie sensibility to it, but like it makes sense. It's still, yeah.
People, and you can also tell people, no, this is a rom-com. You're not gonna they're not gonna it's not an indie movie where they're trying to be cutesy about the storylines. Like, this is a rom-com. You can trust it as well.
Everyone dies and everyone is on drugs or whatever. No,
and it's just like told from the point of view of a ghost or something. This is a rom-com. And do we want to do taglines?
Yeah, so there isn't one that I could find because I guess we like at some point sometimes
get back. It's not that hard. Not all of the taglines of older movies are good. Just have some. I think
the posters have less relevance now, especially for a small production. They don't have a large marketing budget, so I think that sort of falls away.
Invent a tagline. It's not that hard.
I don't know.
I have a fake one.
Yeah.
Love comes guactually.
I was gonna say I was gonna do a bad love guactually pun, so you took that from me. I don't know. I had something. The mouth is the Stonehenge of the no. I don't know.
A long chicken shop dates journey into night.
I don't know. Yeah. Love in Peckham, I guess. I want to come back to Peckham. But
Love in Peckham 2.0.
Yeah.
Go watch it. It's a fun movie. It looks great. Again, it looks great.
Finally watch Super Bob again and just do a double feature of things set in Peckham. Watch 2 obscure indie rom-coms set in Peckham. You won't regret it. Also, they're both very short. Like, make movies shorter.
Like 80-ish minutes, yeah.
This is another thing that comes if you don't have budget. You will literally run out of money, and then that makes that movie shorter. But again, it makes it more concise. It forces people to be very concise in what they're actually committing to screen and the dialogue and all of that. And it actually makes for better stuff.
Yeah, which 90 minutes is fine for a rom-com. It doesn't need to be much longer.
It doesn't need to be much longer.
Looking at you,
I think this is even shorter. I think this is like
it's 84. I think.
Yeah,
it's really short. I looked it up at some point. Yeah. So yeah, it's short. You can just fit it in. You can watch it as basically 2 episodes of something, and you'll be happy you did.
Exactly.